Are you sure? Yes.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public meeting for the Washington Lane Traffic Safety Project. My name is Nathan Parrish, and I am the PennDOT Project Manager. We also have with us the design team, including Abby Gantz and Andrew Gould. Just a quick note, this meeting will be recorded and available on the project webpage. For tonight's meeting, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the top of the Microsoft Teams window to input and post your question. Questions will be answered by the project team at the end of the presentation. If your question is related to a specific slide, then we also ask that you include the slide number with your question. For tonight's meeting, we will review project selection and project overview, the project purpose, existing conditions, safety improvements, proposed design, project schedule, review next steps, and wrap up with questions. So this project is part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and this is a federal aid program, and the purpose of this program is to achieve a significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries. To qualify for the federal funding, it requires a data-driven, strategic approach to improving safety with a focus on performance. To capture this funding, PennDOT will review areas that have a high number of crashes, develop targeted improvements to reduce the number of crashes, and then analyze how these targeted improvements will reduce crashes along a corridor. Now I'll turn the presentation over to the design team and Andrew to run through the project and how crashes can be reduced along Washington Lane.
Thanks, Nate. This safety project is located in Philadelphia County near the Montgomery County border. The project runs from Stenton Ave to Cheltenham Ave along the Washington Lane corridor. The project is localized at all of the signalized intersections shown here. Work is included at Stenton, Mansfield, Rodney, Lober, Woolston, Thuron, Limekiln, Ogontz, Briar, and Cheltenham Ave. Later in the presentation, Abby will highlight the proposed design at each intersection. Just to give everyone a little context of the corridor, there are three elements worth noting. In the area of Lober and Woolston, there is the Cheltenham Hills Cemetery. Near Thuron Ave is the Samuel W. Pennypacker School. And at the northern limit of the corridor is within the Washington Lane Historic District. Here's an existing photo to give context to the corridor. The project is about 9 blocks long along Washington Lane. The speed limit is posted at 25 miles an hour. We have one travel lane in each direction with parking on both sides and bike lanes on both sides. And there are bus stops at all the signalized intersection corners. And it is a signalized intersection corridor. So why we're here tonight describing this project to you, the purpose of the project is to reduce the number and severity of potential crashes along the corridor. Additionally, the project will improve the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists at the signalized intersection. The project was selected and identified by PennDOT as a corridor with a high percentage of fatal injury and pedestrian crashes. The project's intersections have experienced 99 crashes over a 5-year period from 2018 to 2022. Of the 99 crashes, roughly 15% of them were pedestrian crashes. Pedestrian crashes are very critical along this corridor as pedestrians are vulnerable road users and do not have protections of steel cages of vehicles. Crash numbers will be shown later in the presentation for each intersection. Just to give a little project overview, we are located in Philadelphia, as I mentioned, and PennDOT's aware of all the SEPTA routes that are present in the project area. We're aware of the SEPTA routes along the corridor and crossing the corridor. We've also reviewed SEPTA's bus revolution recommendations, which show the Route 81 bus running along Washington Lane. As PennDOT enters final design for the project, we will coordinate with SEPTA and coordinate the bus stop locations, and those may change through final design. So this is a safety-driven project, so here's a list of the safety improvements that are proposed. Each safety measure was included in what's called a highway safety manual analysis to determine the reduction in crashes. These improvements were evaluated at a corridor level, and the project is expecting to reduce overall crashes by 13% and reduce fatal and injury crashes by roughly 12%. The next few slides will explain what each safety improvement measure will look like. Bump outs. Now we're going to get into the safety improvements that's included with the project. All the intersections will have proposed bump outs where they are applicable. A curb bump out is when the sidewalk bulbs out into the intersection by taking up a parking lane or a bike lane or utilizing unnecessary pavement. Bump outs keep pedestrians safer in 3 distinct ways. First, by making the distance shorter for pedestrians, they decrease the time that a pedestrian is in the street and vulnerable to being hit by a car. By having a shorter distance to cross, the pedestrian completes the cross more quickly, thus allowing traffic to flow better. Second, bump outs also serve to make the neck of the street narrower at the intersection. Doing this restricts cars making lefts and rights faster, so this slows them down. Lower speeds increase the time for a driver to see a pedestrian and decrease the likelihood of severe injuries if a pedestrian gets hit by a car. Third, bump out installations essentially prevent vehicles from illegally parking near the corner. Vehicles at corners obstruct vision for the driver making turns as well as for pedestrians seeking to cross. PennDOT realizes that the addition of these bump outs will have minor changes to legal parking spaces along the corridor. PennDOT computed the overall parking changes for the corridor. There are approximately 540 parking spaces along the corridor, and roughly 6% of the legal parking will be traded for these safety improvements. With any safety improvement, there's going to be a trade-off, and PennDOT believes that the bump outs will significantly improve the safety issues for the corridor. Later in the presentation, we'll go through each intersection and we'll discuss the parking changes at each location. We would like to hear feedback from the community on the parking changes and improved safety. Comment cards are going to be located on the PennDOT project's website. One feature of these bump outs to better improve bicycle presence at the intersection is to bring bikes up to sidewalk level at the intersections. The reasoning behind this is to allow for buses to load in lane and removes that conflict of a bus boarding and unboarding and blocking a bike lane. Here's an image provided by the City of Philadelphia, provided by a City of Philadelphia employee as an example of a surface bike lane in Seattle, Washington. You can see the bike lane striped out here in green, and off to the left here is the bus shelter for the loading, so pedestrians will have to cross the surface sidewalk level bike lane. Here's another photo of a bus boarding segregated from a bike lane. This eliminates that immediate conflict of a bus unloading passengers onto a bike lane or blocking the bike lane. Here's an example of a bump out. You can see the curb line curves towards the roadway by eliminating the shoulder. The project will be converting old pedestal mounted signals. So now we're getting to some of the signal upgrades along the corridor here. So the project's going to convert old pedestal mounted signals, which you can see on the left here. These are typically off the roadway, and we're going to be installing what are called mast arm signals, which is the right image. Mast arm signals places the signal overhead the lanes to provide better visibility for oncoming vehicles. The project's also going to be installing accessible pedestrian signals, or APS push buttons. Shown here on the left, you simply push it or wave at it to actuate the signal. We're going to be installing pedestrian countdown timers and also installing retroflective black plates, the yellow border around the signal, to improve the visibility of the signal. Pavement markings will be refreshed throughout the corridor and include bike lane conflict markings to better delineate traffic, both vehicular and bicycle, through the intersections. This will improve visibility of bikes along the corridor and specifically at the intersections where there's conflicts. The project will also be installing a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or an RRFB. These RRFBs are a proven safety measure to improve yielding compliance at mid-block crossings. In order to actuate the signal, each pedestrian must push the push button or wave at it when they're standing on the ramp. RRFBs are a proven safety measure from federal highways and can increase compliance by upwards of 98%. Also, the Briar Road mid-block crossing that's going to be proposed, which you'll see some concepts from Abby later, will be a raised crosswalk, where the roadway profile will be raised to match the level of the sidewalk. This slows cars down and makes the sidewalk to crosswalk transition easier from a pedestrian perspective. Now I'm going to pass it off to Abby, and she's going to get into some of the design elements for the corridor.
Thanks, Andrew. So we heard about a lot of benefits of bump outs, like slowing down turning vehicles, but one of the elements we have to balance with that are the need for larger vehicles to be able to make the turns around these new curbs that are extended into the former road. So depending on the type of road, we look at the main road and the cross street and determine based on the city standards what type of vehicle needs to be accommodated. So the vehicles you see here are 3 of the vehicles that we are designing for, and they vary throughout the corridor. So on each slide of each location, we'll see the vehicle that needed to be accommodated by those turns, and in some cases that informed where we could and could not be able to design bump outs. We are going to now walk through each location of the design. Along Washington Lane, we are planning improvements at the following intersections: Stenton, Mansfield, Rodney, Lober, Woolston, Thuron, Limekiln, Ogontz, Briar, and Cheltenham. This is the first location along the corridor. This is one of the limits of our work at Washington Lane and Stenton Avenue. We can advance here to the proposed design. There are a few things before we talk about the design itself that we want to point out on each slide. So as we go through, you'll be able to take notice of these different pieces of information on the slide. In the upper left-hand corner, there is a box showing the number of parking spaces that will be reduced by implementing this design, and also the total crashes at the intersection that were within our study period. There's also a legend in the bottom left corner. And that, particularly in the legend, we want to call your attention to the blue, meaning proposed traffic signals, and the purple color, which are existing traffic signals that are receiving upgrades on the poles that are already there. Finally, to call your attention to the compass in the upper right-hand corner. Because the direction of Washington Lane is a little bit not a true north, we wanted to call this out so when we refer to directions, when we're talking about the design, it'll be clear what we mean by that. So in this case, we're considering Washington Lane to run north to south. And so the north is to the right of each slide, south is on the left, and our cross streets are running east-west. So hopefully, as we refer to different corners, we can use that directional system to be clear. Now, to get into the actual design here, this is the limit of our work. So we are only working on the northern side of the intersection, proposing a design. And this intersection differs a little bit from the designs we'll see going forward because this is the terminus of the work, and we needed to accommodate that largest truck that we looked at. At this location, we are keeping the bike lane in the road, and that allowed us to still get some improvement with a bump out without sacrificing the ability for the large vehicles to turn. Next, we're moving on to Mansfield, Washington Lane and Mansfield. So this is a very standard looking intersection. Nothing is particularly unusual about it. And at this intersection, we were able to accommodate bump outs at all 4 corners. The vehicle that we had to accommodate because of the type of roads that are meeting here was on the smaller side. It's that one you see in the upper right corner. And Andrew talked a bit about the bike level, the sidewalk level bike lanes and how they interact with bus boarding. So the 2 longer bump outs you see across from each other are that sort of combination bus boarding and sidewalk level bike lane design. The other 2 are still providing, even though they're short, still providing the surface level bike lane and the benefit of visibility for the pedestrians and shortening the crossing distance. And this intersection will receive new traffic signals. Next, we're moving on to Washington Lane and Rodney. And again, nothing particularly of note here on the existing condition, but this is a bit of a smaller cross street. But again, we're accommodating one of the smaller vehicles, so we were able to fit bump outs at all 4 corners, very similar to the previous design. And we're also improving, upgrading all the traffic signals here with new signal equipment. The next location we'll look at is Washington Lane and Lober Avenue. Something to note here, we are bordering the Cheldon Hills Cemetery, and there is a bit of a skew to Lober from one side of the intersection to the next. So what that meant for our design was that we were able to accommodate the 2 longer bus boarding bump outs. And then we did not include one at the northeast corner because it worsened the condition that already existed of the intersection being skewed, and it made turning difficult. And at the southwest corner, we are not proposing a bump out, but we are redoing the sidewalk on the corner so that the curve of the turn is a little smaller. And that can have the effect of slowing down vehicles as well. And it also allows us the opportunity to design ADA ramps that are compliant to current standards. And this intersection also receives new traffic signals. Now we'll move on to Washington Lane and Woolston Avenue. So the cemetery stretches the entire block. So here we are at the other end of the cemetery, and we have that same sort of skew condition of the cross street from one side of the intersection to the other. Here we were able to accommodate the 2 longer bus boarding bump outs, but not bump outs on the other 2 corners, again, which worsen the alignment of the cross street and also made the turning movements difficult for the design vehicle. This intersection will get new traffic signals as well. Now we'll take a look at Washington Lane and Thoron Avenue. And this, again, was a pretty standard aligned intersection, and you can see we're bordering Pennypacker School there. And this intersection was able to accommodate a design of 2 longer bus boarding bump outs. The other 2 corners, we were not able to fit them in due to needing to allow space for the vehicle to turn. This intersection will also get new traffic signals. Now we're moving along to Washington Lane and Limekiln Pike, and this is a 5-way intersection, which makes it a little unique, but then when we look at the design, we are actually still able to accommodate bump outs at 4 of the corners. And on the intersections, also getting new traffic signals. There we can see that 74th Avenue is one way away from the intersection, and we can still fit the bus boarding bump outs, and then the other two corners as well receive them. Now we're going to move on to Washington Lane and Ogontz Avenue. And this is also a 5-way intersection. Now this intersection is a bit different from the others because in most cases when we design a bump out, we are utilizing space from the parking lane to be able to move the curb out further into the street. And in this intersection, turning lanes are introduced close to the intersection on Ogontz and Washington Lane. And so to accommodate the space that the turning lanes take up, the parking lanes drop off. So we don't have that space available like we do at the other intersections to utilize for bump outs. So looking at what safety improvements we could provide here, the yellow area was an area where we were able to introduce a bump out, and it will be a bus boarding bump out. And we are making a bit of an improvement at the northeastern corner where we're upgrading an ADA ramp that is not compliant to standards. And then close to the intersection, we can see in the upper left-hand corner an example, but the blue dotted line in the plan view relates to the picture in the upper left-hand corner. And this will be lane separator curb. And what this does is when traffic is light at slower times, turning vehicles can cut across lanes, and this is a vertical element that prevents cars from cutting across in that way. And now we'll move on to Briar Road. Now, this is not a signalized intersection. It is an intersection with 76th Avenue and Briar Road where there's no traffic signal today. And the reason we are planning improvements here is because there is a larger distance between the nearest two signalized intersections. So when that offer a crosswalk. So for someone who does want to cross here, it is unlikely for them to walk to the nearest signalized intersection to be able to do that more safely. So in cases like that, it can be a safety improvement to provide a mid-block crossing. And Andrew showed us some examples of what those can look like, but there is a flashing light with signs when a person arrives to cross here that is actuated, and there are markings in the road that indicate that the car needs to stop and give pedestrians the right of way to cross here. And this is accompanied with bump outs that also make that crossing distance a little bit shorter. And here's an example we can see kind of in a 3D of what this would look like. The crosswalk itself is actually raised to meet the level of the curb, so there's no ramp up and down. And finally, moving on to our last location, Cheltenham Avenue. This is the limit of the city and the county of Philadelphia, and the limit of our project as well. And here again, we looked at designing bump outs here, but there were some alignment issues from one side of the intersection to the other. So the safety improvement that we opted to provide here actually doesn't include bump outs. It is some improvements to the way the intersection striping is designed to better align the lanes from one side of the intersection to the other. And the signals on the Montgomery County side were recently upgraded as part of another project. So we are not proposing signal upgrades here. And one other note, we want to, thank you. Andrew's going to discuss typically how a project like this gets constructed.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. So now, how are we going to build these bump outs and signalized intersections? The intersections are going to be broken out into quadrants or corners, and each corner is going to be done one at a time or one side at the time, like northbound side first and then southbound side. If there is enough width, a two-way operation shown on the left image here is going to be utilized with basically cones and flagging, and then during non-working times it would be opened back up to traffic. If there is not enough width for 2 lanes, then a flagging operation is going to be utilized, which will be following the right image. And again, both all the lanes will be opened back up during non-working hours. Additional considerations is how will pedestrians cross these intersections during construction? Well, there will be short-term closures and pedestrian diversions around the work zones. As you could imagine, this is a very common situation in Philadelphia when they do construction, and the city has prepared standards referred to as the Temporary Pedestrian Access Route, or TPAR. And pedestrians will be diverted around with temporary mid-block crossings, or diverted around from a nearby block or intersection as each corner is being completed. And this is when they're doing their ADA ramps and stuff, because they have to form the concrete, pour the concrete, let the concrete cure. It's not like they could do this all in a 24-hour window. Next, we're going to get into kind of the project schedule and what's next. So as we finish up this public meeting and our public outreach, this is going to allow us to close out the last piece of our environmental clearance. And then we're going to be moving into final design. So next step is we're going to be coordinating with utility companies for relocations. As you can imagine, if we're moving curb lines, we are going to potentially be impacting inlets, drainage inlets. So we're going to have to reconstruct inlets, and that opens up potential utility conflicts. There's no right-of-way on the project, so we're not going to have to take any property from anyone. It's all going to stay within the footprint of PennDOT's owned legal right-of-way. And final design is going to carry us through the first quarter of 2026. The project is expected to be advertised to contractors in early 2026. The advertisement period is a 5-week period where the project plans are put up on PennDOT's website. Contractors can review the plans, ask questions and answers, and at the end of the 5 weeks, all the contractors that put in a bid, the lowest construction bid is awarded the project. Construction right now is expected to take approximately 18 months of active work, but it's shown a little bit longer here due to winter shutdowns. And just one thing to note on that construction duration is utility relocations can be a major player in construction duration. Also, with there being a lot of traffic signal equipment, there have been a lot of delays in fabrication times. So I think the construction schedule that's shown here being completed in early 2028 is feasible with what we have going on. I think that kind of wraps it up, so I'll pass it back off to Nate if we have any questions here.
Thank you, Andrew. And yes, we will open it up to questions right now. So just a reminder, if you have a question, go ahead to the Q&A, type it into the chat, and then we can begin to answer questions. Also, don't forget we have a project webpage. There's also a comment form where you can make questions outside of this forum. And at the same time, if you have individuals that weren't able to attend tonight, they can go to the webpage, they can watch the recording, and then fill out the comment form on the webpage as well. So right now we don't, lights are going out there, let's turn them back on. So right now we don't have any questions in the Q&A or the chat. We'll wait for a few minutes to see if any come in from the attendees that we have so far. So if you have a question, please go to the chat and post it for us, and we're happy to answer any questions that the group has. And then once we finish with questions, we'll wrap up the presentation for the evening. So still don't have any questions from the attendees that we have this evening online. So we will hang out for another minute or two. If we don't get any questions, then we'll wrap up for the evening. So we did get one question. So what % of African Americans will be employed to work on this project from beginning to end? I don't have that information or know what it will be. It's dependent on the contractor that gets selected and what their workforce is like, and that's a competitive bidding process. So typically PennDOT will select the lowest bidder from the contractor to construct the project. So a few more questions coming in. Will this work be done during the daylight hours? Yes, most of the work, all of the work will be done during daytime. Most of the work typically will be done between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. when there's a little bit less traffic on the road. As Andrew explained earlier, with temporary conditions, it'll kind of get removed during peak hours if possible. Do you know if a similar project is being explored for Upsall Street? I am not familiar I'm not sure if there is or isn't a similar project along Upsall Street. I think we've answered all the questions so far that have come through in the chat. Any other questions from the attendees that we have this evening? And just another reminder, this presentation will be posted on the webpage for others to go watch when they have availability, and there's also a comment card to be able to continue to make comments. All right, well, seeing no new comments coming through from the group and the attendees, we're going to wrap up for the evening. We definitely appreciate everyone's time attending and learning a little bit more about this proposed safety project. And again, if you want to learn more about the project, we have a project webpage. That's how you access the meeting this evening. Please share the information with your neighbors so they can come and view the recording and continue to make comments. Another comment came through: this project have to be approved by the residents of the neighborhood. I don't think there's like an official approval from the residents of the neighborhood that has to come through, but we definitely want to hear from the community, see what they like or don't like about a project, so that we can better make this project around what the community needs, with the focus on safety.
Nate, do you want to mention that we met with the local stakeholders and council members and that they were in favor?
Andrew, you got it.
Okay. We met previously with local stakeholders and representatives, and specifically Councilman Phillips was very passionate about this corridor and expressed interest in improvements of the corridor. So should you have any concerns, use comment cards or contact your local representatives.
All right, seeing no new comments or questions coming through, we'll wrap up for the evening. So again, appreciate everyone's time. And again, please go to the webpage to review the recording and offer more comments and feedback for us. And again, reach out to us if you have questions. And then, you can also make comments on the project webpage. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Bye.